All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Good Tavach. Hope that everyone had a beautiful and uplifting Shabbos. An incredible schus Baruch Hashem to be able to begin another week of Ezu Neshach together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for today's share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsor for the month of Nissan, Saeed Sima Haken, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month to show their Hakarat Hatov to Hashem for all of his Nisim and Niflaos. May Hakadosh Baruch Hu continue to bestow his rachmanus upon us, redeem all of the hostages, and provide complete Hatzlacha to our soldiers, to Am Yisrael, to EretzYisrael, and the nishmat Yerachmiel Buck's father, Martin Buck, Motle ben Chaim Leib HaKohen, Zichron Livracha. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's mother, Florette Pollack, Sarah Bas Avrohom, Zichron Livracha. And today's pastries are dedicated in honor of Ari Lerner for his commitment to making sure. Is Ari here? Okay, you'll tell him if you see him. Ari Lerner. All the way in the kitchen. Today's pastries are dedicated in honor of Ari Lerner for his incredible commitment. And really, Chavra, you don't know, like we walk in and you just grab a cup of coffee, and the only time you notice it is for some reason if it's not exactly ready the moment, walk in, but otherwise we just take it for granted. But understand that there is a man behind the coffee, and that man. There are a couple of men. There's a team. Baruch Hashem. Now, as the shir has grown, there is a team. But the quarterback is Rabbi Ari Lerner, and he's been doing it now. I think this might be his 10th year. I think so. This might be a decade of service. Rabbi, thank you so much. We truly appreciate you. And truly, sometimes the greatest tzarchei tzibur are the ones that don't get the fanfare and don't, I guess ruin that, right? But okay, the ones that don't get the fanfare or the publicity are the ones that are not as glorious, but those are often the ones that make all the difference, and thank you so very much. Well, so with that, let us get started. Today's daf is Samach Zayin. We have a lot to do today. We are picking up on the bottom of Samach Vav Beis, literally last two lines, Amarava. Boom, on Samach Zayin. Excellent, good. That's much farther than we normally get, right, in the day shir. So Rava said as follows. We'll say top of Samach Zayin 67a. So we'll say, so remember again, we are in this sugya of what's called mechila betos, which means that when someone forgives a claim, right, or forgives an entitlement, but it's done ultimately again betos, it's out of mistake, is that mechila, is that quote unquote forgiveness, is that valid or not? So that's our topic over here. So Amar Rava. Rava says as follows. Havya Sivna Kamei Rav Nachman. I was sitting in front of Rav Nachman. Now remember again, Rav Nachman is the opinion that says Mechila Betos Havi Mechila. That ultimately, again, when you forgive a claim, even if the forgiveness is done by accident, ultimately, again, it is a valid Mechila. So Rava says, I was saying before Rav Nachman, Ubayla Osve Ona. And I was going to refute his position. From the concept of Ona. So we'll say back to our Ona days. By the way, here's what's funny, right? Doesn't Ona now seem like a walk in the park, right? The good old days of Ona, where life was simple, three levels, less than a sixth, more than a sixth. Machlokas about what you do, but again, we thought that was complicated. Then little did we know that Ezu Neshach was waiting for us. So the Gemara says as follows. So Rav says, I was going to refute Rav Nachman's position from the concept of Ona. We'll see what the refutation was in just a moment. Va'odik, so the Gemara says, Va'odik chazison islandus. And ultimately, again, it's almost as if, so now Rav says, Rav Nachman anticipated my question. And he was going to refute my refutation from the concept of islandus. Okay, we're gonna explain exactly what all of this means in just a moment. So we'll say, so remember again, islandus, just for our purposes, right? Well, let's go. Let's see. So the Gemara says, V'hari Ona. So Rav says, here was going to be my refutation. So we'll say, so just get the following facts in order. Rav Nachman holds mechila betos havi mechila. That if you go ahead and you forgive, it's actually better to say waive or forgive an entitlement, even if you do so accidentally, the waiving or the forgiveness is effective. So Rava says, I was gonna share that. I was going to ask on that from Ona. What's Ona? So the Gemara says, "The mechila b'taos he for the havi mechila." They both say, think about this just a moment, right? I overcharged Ruvain by more than a sixth, or by a sixth, or more than a sixth. They both say that's Ona, right? Because remember again, little chazara, less than a sixth. What's the halacha? Mechila, excellent, right? Less than a sixth is nothing. We're just mochel. A sixth or more than a sixth. So now both say, so what's the halacha? Now again, I'm selling an object to Ruvain. I overcharge him by a sixth. Reuven willingly buys the object. Now, by his willingly buying the object, we'll say, what is that? What do we call that? That's mechila b'tos. In other words, he's tendering the money. He's buying the object. So essentially what he's doing is, he is forgiving the 1/6 overcharge amount. Now again, he's forgiving it by mistake. But lamaisa, he's forgiving it. And we'll say, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? The halacha is, I have to return the money. What do you see from there? Right? At a 6, you have to return the money. What do you see from there? That mechila b'tos, lo havi mechila. That when somebody accidentally waives the right or forgives the right, that is ultimately not an effective waiving or forgiveness. So Rav says that was the kasha that I was going to ask on Rav Nachman. Va'odik chazisan. So as I said, now remember, so Rav Nachman, he saw where Rava was going, and he preempted Rava's refutation with a support of his own. And what's his support? Islandness. So we'll say the case of islandness. Remember again, the case of an islandness, we'll say, is Reuven marries Rachel. And it turns out that Rachel never develops as a woman. And as such, again, when a man marries an islandess, this is considered to be a mekach tos. And again, the halacha with a mekach tos, a mistake in sale, is that essentially the transaction is voided. Right? In other words, when I enter into a transaction thinking that it's one thing, and it turns out that it's something else, that is grounds to go ahead and void the sale. So again, I will say, it's not just that we get the money back. But a mekach tos means it's void. A simple example. Just give you a simple example. I'm buying a car. I go over to Reuven. And I want to buy a Honda, right? And instead, Reuven sells me a Chevy. So again, different languages. The object that we contracted to buy, is not the object that was sold to me. It's a mekach tos. So watch this. So here we go. Hari islandness. De mechila b'tosi v'havi mechila. So we'll say, islandness is an example of mechila b'tos, a mistake in mechila. We'll see what this means in just a moment. And it works. So we'll say, so what's the case? This is actually really a lot of very interesting information over here brought down in this case. Hamima enes. So we'll say, so now a number of different marriage cases. Mima enes miyun is talking about a case of a mother or a brother who married off a minor girl. So remember again, midaraisa, who has the ability to marry off a minor girl, midaraisa, who has the ability to do so, right? Only the father. That's biblical marriage. So mother and brother have the ability to do so, but it is only going to be midrabanan. So we'll say, so now because it's midrabanan, how does the girl get out of that relationship? How does she get out of it? Miyun. Simple refusal. She doesn't need a get. She doesn't need anything. She just says, you know what? I don't want this. Now again, this is assuming she's doing this while she's still a minor. If she remains in this marriage into adulthood, then it becomes a full-fledged marriage. So again, let's say you have father died. So now let's say surviving brother, older brother or mother marries off daughter to Reuven. The girl is a ketana. She's a minor. So now while she's a ketana, she has the ability to do miyun, refuse the marriage, and she's out. That's mima enes. Next, shnia. So we'll say shnia is one of those interesting cases of, remember again, we'll say back to where did we have shnias? Yavamas. Excellent, thank you. Right, so we'll say, so remember again, in our Yavamas days, in shnias are secondary arayos, rabbinic arayos. So these are marriages that are forbidden midrabanan, but are permitted biblically. So a man who gets into a marriage with a shnia, or v'ha'ailanis. And ailanis, I will say, is a woman who fails to mature physically. In all of these cases, I will say, ein lahem lo ksuva, v'lo peros, v'lo mazonos, v'lo belos. In all of these cases, when these marriages, so just to point out over here, Mima Enes is the case ultimately where the girl is dissolving the marriage, right? Shnia, the halacha dissolves the marriage because we can't allow, right? It's a rabbinically prohibited marriage. Shnia and Ailanis, we would generally assume that it is the man who is voiding the marriage als mekach tos. In all of these cases, there's no ksuba, there's no peros. There's no peros. If you look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says over here, lo peros, nechasim shenaflu la birusha achar sheniseis, tiknu chacham shabal ochel peros, velo tiknu tachteim. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, so he's talking about over here, there's no takanas peros. Okay, takanas peros means that halacha l'maisa, in return for the husband's rights of usage over his wife's property, he agrees to redeem his wife. So that takana doesn't apply in these particular situations. Velo mazonos, there is no obligation for mazonos, no obligation for a husband to provide mazonos for his wife in these scenarios. Velo belos, and ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, if the woman went ahead and brought in certain articles of clothing or certain items, and the husband used them over the course of the marriage, normally upon death or divorce, the estate or the husband returns whatever residual is left over. There is no obligation to return the residual in this situation. I will say now, watch this. So now, in this case over here, let's focus on the islandess. The islandess brought in certain things to the marriage that the husband used, right? She's mochel on the use of her property by her husband. Now it turns out that the marriage was never really a marriage. It's right? It's voided because she's an islandess. So I will say, what's the halacha? The husband doesn't have to return any of the stuff that he used. What does that show you? Mechila betos, havi mechila. So I will say, so in this case over here, she thinks that she's allowing her husband to use the property because this is a bona fide marriage. It turns out that it wasn't a bona fide marriage. And yet, again, we don't make the husband pay back any of the stuff that he used. So you see from here that a mistaken forgiveness or waiving of rights is still a valid mechila, still a valid forgiveness or waiving of rights. So I will say, so just to follow the flow over here, right? So Rav Nachman was on the record saying, mechila betalos have mechila. Right? You make a mechila, right? You make a mistake in mechila, you mistakenly forgive or waive rights. I'm not going to translate anymore because now you know it. Mechila betalos, he owes this mechila. Rava says, I had a kasha on this, and he wanted to bring the kasha from Onah. Because the fact that you have to return Onah shows that mistaken mechila is not proper mechila. Rava preempted it by saying I can support. Now Rava doesn't really address Onah, but Rava supports his position with islandess. A man is married to an islandess. The marriage is a voidable union, and yet the husband doesn't have to return any of the property that he used. That shows mechila b'taos, havi mechila. To which the Gemara says, the truth is, all of these are problematic. Why? V'lohi. Lo ona havya tiyufta, v'lo islandess mesayele. The truth is, ona, so Rava's kasha of ona is not really a kasha, and Rav Nachman's support of islandess is not really a support. How so? So lo ona tiyufte. Suppose now watch this. Ona is not a refutation. Why not? De lo yada di ise ona de machil gabe. See, I will say, the problem over here is, the problem in the Onah case is, when I sell to Reuven, I'm overcharging him by a sixth. Reuven is unaware that there's even Onah. Right? That's the whole problem. Mechila betos doesn't mean necessarily a lack of knowledge. Mechila betos means you're fully aware of all the facts, and you waive something accidentally. In this case of Onah, the buyer, has no knowledge of the concept of Onah. He does not realize that there is Onah happening over here. This is this is in a separate bucket. This is in a separate bucket that we normally call chisaron yediyah, where you are fully and totally unaware of what is involved in this transaction. So you can't bring a proof from this. Furthermore, it's actually very interesting. Islandess is not really a good proof to Rav Nachman. Why not? So we'll say this is fascinating. Rachel, who is the islandess over here in this case, it is actually beneficial for her to just have the shame of a married woman. Shame meaning shin mem, not shme, right? In other words, the shame, the title, right? The identity of a married woman. Why? Because I will say at the end of the day, so an islandess is in a real bind. Right? The islandess is in a real bind because again, it's going to be difficult for her to go ahead and contract any marriage because again of an identity issue or just of not an identity issue, she's a woman, but Lamaisa just it's going to be difficult. So for her, the fact that she was in a marital union, even though again that marital union could ultimately be voided, and even though again halacha Lamaisa it'll go ahead and result in the loss of property, it's a good investment for her. It's worth it for her because now she's been involved in a marital union, and some way, somehow, that's helpful for her identity as a woman. Just an interesting idea. So therefore, again, essentially, the Gemara is suggesting is she's willing to accept the loss. So therefore, I will say again, halacha l'maisa, Halacha l'maisa, this machlokes. So really, Rav's kasha on Rav Nachman didn't work. Rav Nachman's proof for his position didn't work. And at the end of the day, the machlokes about is mechila b'tos, does mechila b'tos work or not? That question ultimately still remains. Incredible. So I will say, so let's go ahead. So I just want to point out, you also see over here that within this form of mechila b'tos, the Gemara distinguishes between waiving of a right accidentally, or waiving of an entitlement accidentally, versus being totally oblivious to something. So the Gemara's example over here of ona is a case of obliviousness. Obliviousness is. Right, good. Right, yeah. So being oblivious to it. So that's just, I just want to point out, and we'll get more into that distinction in Eretz Hashem about waiving something by accident versus being totally oblivious to something. Just keep those two categories in mind, because we're going to delve into that a little bit more. All right, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Hayi esesa the amr le'rahu gavra zil zaman li'ara mikrovai. So listen to this. We'll say there was a woman who came over to Ruvain, right? So let's call it Rachel comes over to Ruvain. Rachel and Ruvain unrelated. So Rachel comes over to Ruvain, and Rachel asks Ruvain to essentially act as her shaliach, to go ahead and purchase property from one of Rachel's relatives. Okay, so the Gemara says, Azal Zabala. So what happens? So Ruvain does his shlichus. He goes and he purchases the property for her. Amarle. So we'll say, so now let's call the seller Shimon, right? So Shimon is Rachel's relative, and Ruvain is acting as Rachel's agent to purchase property for her from Shimon. Okay. No problem. So they're concluding the sale, and Shimon says to Ruvain, so Shimon says to Ruvain, I just want to tell you, right now I'm selling property because I'm short on funds. But I just want to, because we'll say, again, from the Gemara's perspective, the only reason you're ever selling real property is because you need cash. If you don't need cash, people aren't generally selling real property. So therefore, Shimon says to Ruvain, listen, I'm short on cash, so I'm selling you the property now, but I just want to tell you, I reserve the right to buy back the property, right? Essentially to redeem it back at this current price. When I have money. Okay. So I'll say, so Amarle, at v'navla achi. So we'll say, so Ruvain says back. Now Rashi points out Navla. The second gear of Rashi is that Navla was the woman's name. Navla was her name. So Ruvain says to Shimon, look, you and Navla, you're relatives. I'm sure you'll work it out. Terrible, right? Terrible thing, right? The worst misconception that just because people are related, that they can work stuff out related to money. I would say, so this is very interesting. So remember, as far as Ruvain is concerned, right? Ruvain is just the shaliach to buy property. Ruvain wasn't charged with anything other than buying a piece of property. Shimon says to Ruvain, I'm selling it, but with a t'nai, with a condition that when I have money, I can buy it back. Ruvain responds, look, you and Navla are related. I'm sure you guys could come to an agreement. Okay. So Amar Rav Barafuna, call at v'Navla achi, Amar samcha daite v'lo gamar omikni. So we'll say, so it's interesting. So Rav Barafuna says, just understand, this is a valid t'nai. The fact that the seller, that Shimon said, listen, I'm happy to sell, but again, I just want to be clear that I'm selling with a condition. That at the end of the day, I have the ability to buy it back when I want. And Ruvain the Shaliach responded, you and Navla are family, you'll work it out. Then this is property sold with a t'nai. Okay. The Gemara says, Arahadra. So we'll say, so obviously it goes without saying that because of the Tanai, say Nachinami. Whenever Shimon runs into money, and Shimon has the ability to buy back the field, he absolutely has the right to do so. Here's the interesting Shaila. Peri Mai. So we'll say, what about the produce? So now, let's just play this out. So let's say they go ahead and they enter into this contract on May 5th. On May 5th, 2024. Right? So now what happens? So Shimon sells the field. Right? Navla gets the field. And on May 5th, 2025, so Shimon shows up and he buys back the field. So we'll say, what's the problem? Or what's the question? The whole year, Navla has been consuming payros. She's been consuming produce. So the Shai Rabbi says, now this sounds like a potential ribbis situation. Why? Because what's going to happen? It turns out, Sibel saying, in any case of a sale like this, So it turns out that when Shimon buys back the field, essentially the money was kind of like a loan. So Navla is going to get back her money, right? And what? But she's also consumed a year's worth of produce. So what do you do with produce? Now, is that ribis? Is it not ribis? So what do we do? So watch this. The Gemara says, Pei Rimai. What is the status ultimately again of the peiros? The Gemara says, Ribis Kitsutsi Havu Viyotzi B'Yana. Shabbos says, that's very interesting. Now, one more piece of information. Remember again, we had Ribis Kitsutsa. Shabbos say, what's Ribis Kitsutsa? Ribis Kitsutsa is defined ribis. Right? Defined ribis that is defined ultimately even at the beginning of the transaction. I will say, the simplest case of Ribis Kitsutsa is, I go to Reuven and lend Reuven $100 and say, pay me back $120. Boom. Ribis Kitsutsa, right? $20 of ribis, right there, built it from the beginning. So the Gemara says like this. So do we say that since there is this buyback clause in there, so therefore again we know that should Shimon buy back the field, the produce that Navla consumes is going to be ribis. And therefore again, maybe we look at the produce as ribis ketzutza, and therefore again, she's out. We could extract it in a basin. Now, I'll say one other piece of information over here that we've mentioned in passing. We'll see this more in depth now as well. The halacha is like this. We paskin. We saw this actually a couple of days ago. We paskin. It was on Samechem at base 65b. We paskin like Rebbe Lazar, and Rebbe Lazar holds ribis ketzutza yotze b'dayanin. Right, it was the top of 65b. The halacha is that when you charge defined interest, Basin could extract that from the lender. However, I will say, avak ribis. Now, what's avak ribis? Avak ribis is pretty much any case that's not biblical ribis. Any case. And I will say, now understand, that already says in pretty much, I will say, if you don't have a loan, first of all, any case where there's a ribis situation where it's not a loan, that's already not biblical ribis. That is already going to be rabbinic ribis. So avak ribis is aser. You can't charge it, but if you do charge it and it's paid, it's not recoverable. Bezdin won't recover that for you. Now, if you're the guy who charged it, there is a midas chasidus to return it. But Bezdin does not get involved in this. So Bezdin only gets involved in biblical ribis ketzutza. They'll claw that back for the borrower, but they will not get involved in avak ribis. So I will say, so here the shaila, this is still riveting. So in this case over here, a year later, Shimon comes back, gives Navla the money for the field. Navla has consumed a year's worth of produce. So what's the halacha? How do we look at the produce? Is the produce looked at as ribis ketzutza, defined biblical ribis, in which case the basin will claw it back, or maybe not? Or maybe the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe it's just considered to be able to say avak ribis literally means like the dust of ribis. That's another term for rabbinic ribis. It's rabbinic ribis, and therefore Allah Chalamaisa, again, it's aser, and really again, if Navla is a good woman, which you have no doubt that she is, she should return it. But Bezin is not getting involved in it. So we'll say that's the Shaila. Amar Rama Bar Rafuna, Mistabra ki avak ribis havu ven yotze midyanim. So we'll say Rabbi Rafuna says, no. This is not ribis ketzutza. You can't call this ribis ketzutza. This is avak ribis. So we'll say it also can't be ribis ketzutza because it's so amorphous. In other words, maybe Shimon will buy it back, maybe he won't buy it back. There's so many different things going on over here. You can't call it ribis ketzutza. It's avak ribis. So because it's avak ribis, therefore again, when Shimon comes and buys back the field, midas chasidus, Navla should definitely go ahead and pay it back. But l'maisa, Bezin is not going to claw it back. V'chein amar rava ki avak ribis havein yosem midyanin. Okay, so we'll say that, and that seems to be. That seems to be where the Gemara is going with this. That this would be considered to be a case of avak ribis. Okay, let's build on this. Amalei abai, l'rabba, mashkanta mai. Okay, so watch this. What about a mashkal? So what about a different kind of case? I lend Reuven money, and Reuven gives me a field as collateral. Okay, so now we'll say the duration of the loan is 5 years. 5 years. So now we'll say, so now I want to go ahead and use the produce of the field. So can I use the produce of the field, or is that considered to be ribis? Look at Rashi just a moment. Mashkanta, it's the first white line in Rashi. Mashkan lo sada v'lo katzim olachol peros l'shem ribis elastam v'hu yored va'asa va'achol. So we'll say, so what happens? I lent Reuven $10,000. Reuven gave me a field. The field is collateral. The truth is, we just didn't say anything about the produce. It never came up. So I decided, you know what? I'm holding on to it anyway. I'm going to make myself at home. Right? I work the field. I till the soil. I plant the crops. Whatever else is involved in farming, I can make up more stuff. Right? And I go ahead and I enjoy the produce. So I'll say, so now, what is that? What is that? So the Gemara says, on one hand, Hasam Taima Mai Mishum Delo Katzlei. So we'll say, so on the other hand, in the previous case, maybe the reason why it wasn't ribis was because nothing was ever defined. So the Gemara says, Hachanami Lo Katzlei. So too over here. So too we'll say over here, that Allah, so right, there was never, Reuven and I, we never spoke about the produce. So because nothing was ever defined, therefore you can't call this a ribis situation. Or Dilma, Hasam Zvini Hacha Halva. No, we'll say, no. This case, in the previous case, the reason why maybe the whole arrangement didn't produce also a ribis situation is because that was a sale. And already again, in any case of a sale, that's already going to be a vak ribis. That's how Rabbi said, this is a loan. And already now, when you're talking about, again, I've lent Reuven $10,000. In 5 years, I'm getting back $10,000. And then for 5 years, I'm consuming produce. I don't know. That's definite. Even though, again, we never negotiated anything, that certainly sounds a lot more like ribis. To which the Gemara says, Amalei, Hasam Taimamai, Ushum de lo Katzlei, Hachanami lo Katzlei. So we'll say, so no, he said to him, no, we'll say the reason why it's not ribis in either case is because nothing was ever defined. So because nothing was ever defined or nothing was ever negotiated, therefore Allah Chalamayse, you can't call it ribis. Can't call it ribis. In other words, a ribis transaction is one in which there is a clear obligation for principal plus additional amount. In this case over here, all I was given was a field. The field was to be my collateral. There was never any discussion regarding the payros, and therefore you can't call that ribis. Amara papi, avad Ravina uvda. So now watch this. So ultimately, again, Ravina conducted himself in this particular way, namely that what I was saying in a case of a sale, right? In this case of a sale, and right of a field, v'chashiv v'apik peri delo kirava barafuna. So let's listen to this. So Rav Papi had a situation like this. I will say more resembling the sale case than the loan case. And Rav Papi, at the end of the day, when the seller bought back the property, he went ahead and he extracted the payros from the purchaser. Because he felt that if you allow the purchaser to keep the payros, that ultimately again would be ribis, and therefore he extracted the payros, not like Rabba Barav Huna. Okay. Amar Marbrid Rav Yosef B'Shmei Rava Ha Mashkanta. So we'll say, okay. So essentially what you see over here is two, and we'll see that Allah Chalamayse with these cases, but so far I see two different cases. Case number one is a case of a sale with a buyback clause. Right? So essentially, again, we could even just, we'll say, the Navla piece kind of just was interesting because that's how the case occurred, but you could just simplify it. Reuven goes in and sells Shimon a piece of property. Shimon says, no problem, I'm selling it to you, but if I want the opportunity to buy back, I reserve that right. Reuven says, okay, right? 5 years later, Shimon buys it back. What do you do with all the produce that Reuven consumed over the course of those 5 years? That's one case. Case two, Reuven lent Shimon money, where Shimon gave Reuven collateral. Right? They didn't stipulate anything regarding the field. Ultimately, again, Reuven consumes produce over those 5 years. 5 years later, Shimon then goes ahead and pays back principal. What's the status of the produce? So I will say, so two cases. Now, obviously, case number one, at most, is going to be a vak ribis. It's not going to be ribis ketsutza. Number one, because there's nothing defined. Number two, because it's a case of a sale, not a case of a loan. The real ikr case comes in case number two, because that's a loan. And even though there is nothing defined, but Allah Chalamayse, again, it certainly resembles a ribis scenario. So just hold those two cases in your mind. We're not finished yet. Says the Gemara. Next. Amar Marbreid Rav Yosef B'Shmei Rava. Hamashkanta ba'asra de mesalgi. Okay, so we'll say, this is really quite fascinating over here, and this opens the door to a couple of other additional cases which are really very interesting. So watch this. So I'll say there are two different types of loan scenarios. One type of loan scenario is like this. So imagine the following scenario. Reuven lends Shimon money. Reuven lends Shimon $10,000. Shimon gives Reuven a field as collateral. Okay. So let's say the duration of the loan is 5 years. 5 years. So I will say certain loans. So there were different minhagim in different places. Does a borrower have the ability to pay back the debt early or not? Right. That's the shaila. That's the shaila. Now I will say. So you'll say to yourself, why would a lender? Why? In other words, it should be like, of course, you can pay back the debt early. Why would you not want that? So I will say for the simple reason that if the lender has the rights of usage of the collateral, then I will say, so remember again, paying back the debt early curtails the use of the collateral by the lender. So that's where this would come up a little bit. So watch this. The Gemara says as follows: Hamashkanta ba'asra de masalki. So I will say, so now Reuben lent Shimon $1,000. Let's make it $10,000 for 5 years. And Shimon gave Reuben collateral of land. And let's say this is a place. Literally, I will say mashkanta ba'asra de masalki. He gave him collateral in a place, right? In a place, in an area where ultimately, again, the borrower could remove the lender. Now, I will say what that means. Borrower could remove the lender means borrower could pay back the debt early, removing the lender from the collateral. So what's the halacha? Achol shir zuzi. So what's it? Before we go on, take a look at Rashi. The Asra de Masalki. Rashi says over here, it's in the wide lines, about 5 lines in. B'makom shenagu lahalvos stam. So we'll say, so the minhag over here was Reuven would lend Shimon $10,000. $10,000, okay? Umal ve'ochel peros v'lo pasik imo b'nechaysa ki lakaman v'nagu l'salek es amal v'mimenu b'chol eis shetasik yad ha'ilov l'mal. So we'll say, so in this case here, it's going to be clear. Reuven lends Shimon $10,000, okay? Now Shimon gives Reuven land, and it's fruit-bearing land. They never negotiated anything regarding the peros. Right? It just never came up. So meanwhile, Reuven is consuming the produce. Right? Now, in this scenario over here, we're talking about a locale where it was accepted that that a borrower could pay off his debt early, right? Thereby, so to speak, removing, quote unquote, the lender from the collateralized property. So now watch this. In that scenario, so the Gemara says, Achal shir zuzi misalkina le. So now watch this. Let's say over the course of the 5 years, or maybe even earlier than the 5 years, Reuven, the lender, has consumed the value of the debt in peros. Right? So now watch this. In other words, Reuven lent Shimon $10,000. Shimon gave Reuven collateral, and now it's year number 4. It's year number 4. And Reuven has already consumed $10,000 worth of produce. So what's the halacha? Misalkina le. In that case, we will remove Reuven from the property. We'll essentially tell Reuven, you know what? Debt paid. Look at Rashi. The misalki. Achol kashir zuzi. Look at that Rashi. He says, Kafi ma shenim karna peros b'shuk. Uba lova lefanenu v'tava v'amar eini ritzoni shiochal perosi b'ribis. Yashumu peros sha'achol v'yitleim b'chovo. Ilo havali zuzi lo misalkina lehashta. So let's listen to this. So Rashi adds in a very important piece over here. So let's say it's year number 4. Shimon comes to Beis Din. Shimon says, listen, Beis Din, I owe Reuven $1,000. I'm just going to tell you, Reuven has already consumed $10,000 worth of produce. If that is true, Beis Din will say, okay, Reuven, debt paid, done. Reuven, remove yourself, right? Give back the collateralized property, and we are done. Achol tfei. So we'll say, what happens if Shimon never went ahead and activated Beis Din? First, let's take a look. I'm sorry, one more Rashi. Misakinale v'afagav davak ribis hiu ve'niyotze b'diyanin hanimili lebasar deshakle aval zeh zarusu ve'inamani cholecho el kedei karen. So we'll say, now watch this. So in case number 1, so there's a whole bunch of things that are going on over here. We're talking about a place where it is permitted for a borrower to pay back his debt early. He's monitoring the payroll's consumption of Reuven. So now Reuven, we've got to the $10,000 mark. Shimon brings Reuven to Beis Din, says Reuven has consumed enough produce to satisfy the debt. Beis Din says, okay, Reuven, done. Debt paid, get off the property. However, if Shimon wasn't monitoring properly, right, and now what happens? Now it's year number 5, and Reuven has consumed $12,000 worth of produce. So Rabbi say, so in that case, achal tfei lo mafkinan minei. So Rabbi say, if Reuven ended up eating $12,000 worth of produce, we don't extract the additional 2,000 from him. Why not? I will say, why not? Because that is avak ribis. That is rabbinic ribis. And remember again, what's the halacha about rabbinic ribis? Beis Din doesn't claw it back. Right? That's just the din. That's the halacha. Now again, if Reuven's a good guy, which we hope that he is, he's going to pay it back because that's the right thing to do. But halacha l'maisa, Beis Din does not involve itself in that. So I will say, right? So all of this is predicated on the alacritiousness, right? The zrizos of Shimon. So if Shimon's on top of his game, and he knows exactly the point where Reuven's consumed the principle, and he swoops in there and he brings them to Beis Din, and he goes, okay, you consume your principle, that's it, we're done. But if Shimon was not careful, and Reuven consumed $12,000 worth of produce, Beis Din will say, okay, we're sorry, not a good thing, right? Reuven, you really shouldn't do this, but Lamaisa, it's a vak ribis, and Beis Din is not going to claw it back. Furthermore, we'll say not only that, the lo mechashvin on mishtara l'shtara. This is very interesting. We'll say furthermore, interestingly enough, we'll say, let's say, Reuven and Shimon, right? Reuven has another debt, or I should say, Shimon has another debt that he owes Reuven, right? So let's say there's loan number one that was for $10,000, and there's loan number two that's for $2,000. So you know what? If you're Shimon, you think to yourself, okay, fine. So Beis Din is not going to claw back the additional $2,000 as avak ribis, but at least what? Take that $2,000 that you took extra, the avak ribis, and apply it to another debt. Halacha is, we don't do that either. Essentially, Beis Din doesn't get involved in avak ribis. They just don't get involved in it. Why? Again, we'll discuss, but they don't get involved. Therefore, you can't allocate the additional $2,000 to another debt. Okay? Ubediasmi. Now, all of this is with regular adults. All those regular adults. How Ubediasmi with Yisomim, with orphans, Achol shir zuzi misalkin alei, Achol tfei mafkinan minei, or mechashvina mishtar l'shtara. So I will say with Yisomim, now Drosa in general we see this, how the halacha goes out of its way to protect the interest of minor orphans. So therefore I will say in this same kind of case, if instead of Shimon, we're dealing with Yisomim, then what will be the halacha? The halacha will be, first of all, again, if Reuven consumed principal, obviously we say, okay, debt paid. If Reuven consumes more than principal, avak ribis, we make him pay it back. And if he consumes more than principal, instead of making him pay it back, if he has another debt against the Yisomim, we'll apply the overage ultimately against that second debt. All in the interest of protecting the Yisomim. Incredible. Amar Ravashi, hashta da'amrit achol tfeilam afkinan minei. So Ravashi said, one second. If you're not going to extract the additional 2,000, right? If you're not going to extract the overage from Reuven, achol shir zuzi nami lo mesalkin alei. Even if Reuven consumed the actual 10,000, you also shouldn't remove it from the property. Why? The Gemara says, "Achal shir zuzi nami lo misalkin le below zuzei." My time. What's the reason? Saluke below zuzei afuki minehu havi avak ribis va'avak ribis eni yotze b'dayanin. So Rabbi say this is incredible. This is absolutely incredible. Rashi says, "Come on, it's not right. It's not right to say that if you hold that you are not going to extract the additional 2,000 from Reuven because that's avak ribis, the additional 2,000." Is no different than the first 10,000. So I will say, what Ravashi is saying is like this, is if Reuven and Shimon did not agree that the produce should count towards payment of the debt, then the produce doesn't count towards payment of the debt. The most the produce could count towards is what? Or I should say, what is use of the produce going to be considered? What is it considered? Ribis. Now, what kind of ribis is it? I will say, this makes a lot of sense, right? If Reuven lends Shimon $10,000, and Shimon gives Reuven collateralized property, and they never made any mention that the produce goes towards payment, there was never an agreement like that. So then I will say, so then what does Shimon owe Reuven? What does he owe Reuven? $10,000 cash. I said, what about the produce? It's ribis. It's ribis. And I will say, but what kind of ribis is it? It's avak ribis. And the issue with avak ribis is, the problem with avak ribis is that borrower is at the mercy of the lender to get it back. Because Beis Din does not intervene in avak ribis. This is so fascinating. Ravashi is saying, you're making this distinction between the produce that corresponds to the principal versus the produce above and beyond the principal. But Ravashi says, that's incorrect. There's no agreement that produce goes to pay down principal. As such, every piece of produce is ribis. Or more specifically, avak ribis, and therefore halacha l'maisa is incredible. At the end of the loan, Shimon is going to owe Reuven $10,000. What about the produce? Ribis, avak ribis, and unfortunately, again, Beis Din is not intervening in that. Hopefully, again, Reuven is a good guy, and he'll give it back. Incredible. So the Gemara says, avak ribis in the Yotze b'dayanin. Avid Ravashi of the Yisomim kitanim. So we'll say Ravashi had a case like this with Yisomim. So we'll say, so again, someone had a debt against the estate, against Yisomim, who were orphans, or I should say differently. Somebody owed the Yisomim money. There was collateralized property. The lender was going ahead and using the property. Amud Beis, Kigidolin. But ultimately, again, interestingly enough, Ravashi treated the Yisomim like Gidolin. That halacha l'maisa, he treated the payros like avak ribis. Amar Rava Breid Rabbi Yosef B'Shmei Rava, Hay mashkanta ba'asra de masalki, lo neichal ela benechaisa. So we'll say, now watch this. Therefore, this is actually very interesting. We'll say, therefore, so Rabbi Yosef says like this, the name of Rava. If you're living in a place where the prevailing custom is that a borrower is able to prepay a debt. So if you are going to lend, therefore, with collateral, right? So again, Reuven is going to lend Shimon $10,000. Shimon is giving Reuven a piece of property. The duration of the loan is 5 years. But we know that halacha l'maisa, the prevailing custom of the locale, is that Shimon could show up anytime he wants with cash in hand, right? This is a thing today also, right? It's not so pashut that you could just prepay. There are mortgages that work like this, right? Not so pashut that you could just show up one day at the bank with $250,000 in cash and say, here's my mortgage, right? Because the bank wants its interest. So there's a concept like this. But yet again, if the prevailing custom is that the borrower could go ahead and prepay the debt, so listen to this. So Rava says that it's very important, the lo neichal ela benechaisa. If the lender is going to consume produce, you have to have some type of I will call it diminution of principle. In other words, what Rav is saying is like this: is we know. In other words, as much as avak ribis is dirabanan and Beis Din is not going to get involved in it. If we know that a certain transaction has the strong possibility of becoming avak ribis, let's be proactive about it. Rabbi say, by the way, what a tremendous Musar HaSkil. If in life you know that something can become a problem, don't wait until it becomes a problem to deal with it. Be proactive. I will say, Nisim b'chol yom, right? Something becomes something blows up, such a dramatic issue. And the truth is, it's dramatic now. It wasn't dramatic a week ago. It was like a little fire, right? Like a little ember that was burning. But I saw what was happening. I saw that this could really become something significant. But I chose not to tackle it then, for whatever the reason. And then it blows up into something more major, and I'm shocked, and I'll say, the whole yisod in life is tackle issues while they're small, before they become big, because then you have so much better of a possibility of true resolution. Incredible idea. So therefore, Rava comes along and says that if we know that we have this type of collateral situation, that halacha l'maisa could lead to avak ribis, let's deal with it now. So what do you do? So we'll say, so therefore, Reuven lends Shimon $10,000. Now, Shimon gives Reuven property. We know that there's the possibility. So I just want to point out, let's think logically, right? So now Shimon has the ability to prepay. So now let's set up an arrangement whereby the debt is objectively diminished a certain amount every single year. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, so we'll say, so now just to understand, the objective, the amount by which you're diminishing the debt each year doesn't even have to really correspond to the value of the payros being consumed. It just has to be a locked-in amount of diminution. Why? What's the logic there? Denira kimochralo. Now, we'll say, essentially what we do is like this. If you diminish the debt by a fixed amount every year, then essentially it has the appearance that the borrower is selling the lender the property for a certain amount per year. for a certain amount per year, that diminution of the debt, whatever it is, it could be $5, it could be $100, it could be whatever it is, that's quote unquote the sale price. That's the sale price. But 1 second. They're going to tell me that Shimon's selling Ruvain the field for $100 a year when the field could produce $5,000 of produce a year? Yes. What's the answer? The answer is you're buying a future. Remember again, so I'm buying the field for $100 a year, but what if the field produces nothing? What if there's a drought? What if there's locusts? What if there's hail? Okay, we can go through all the markets, but you understand, right? In other words, the idea over here is, true, you're buying it for a year, you may also totally lose because the field may produce nothing. So therefore, again, Rav is suggesting this incredible mechanism over here. If you want to collateralize a field and give the lender the right to have payros in the field, and avoid any type of avak ribe situation. It's easy. Just decide every year lender has the field, it knocks off X amount of dollars from the loan. That value is considered to be a purchase price, and once he's purchased the field, albeit at a discount, because it's a future, at a discount, it avoids any type of ribe scenario. Incredible. Let's just finish that Rashi. Rashi says, Shinach lo minachov. Davar HaKatov l'shana, Denira kimochra lo, v'yor b'savek, da'afilu chelka, v'lo yuba peros, Sinach lo osa kitzva, hilchach kishakal minei tfei, lav ribisi. So again, since you're paying the purchase price, right? Since you're paying for the field per year, there's no ribis with any fruit you consume. But you paid so much less than the value of the produce. That's okay because I'm buying the future. So because I'm buying the future, I'm assuming a level of risk that the field may produce nothing. That's reflected in the diminished purchase price, and therefore it's mutter. Now, just this last point of Rashi is very important. But dafka ba'asra de mesalki. Remember, all of this only comes up where? In a locale where you could prepay a debt. Right? You could prepay a debt. Because I will say, if you're in a locale where you can't prepay a debt, this whole thing is not an issue. Why? Because I will say, if you're in a locale where you can't prepay a debt, the way actually the halacha looks at it is that the collateralized property is effectively sold to the lender for that duration. In other words, if Reuven lends Shimon $10,000 for 5 years, and Shimon goes ahead and Shimon gives Reuven a piece of property as collateral, and in that locale you can't prepay a debt, halacha looks at that property as sold to Reuven for the duration of the debt. For the duration of the debt. So because of that, you're not going to run into a ribis situation anyway. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, that will be totally fine. So again, this only applies in a situation where really, again, you could prepay the debt, because if you're prepaying the debt, that's where you get into potential ribis situation, or a vacuum situation. Incredible. However, the Gemara says, "V'tzura merabanan, afilu b'nechayis lo nechol." So we'll say, a Talmud Chacham should not consume produce even if there is a fixed diminution amount every year. So Rebbe says, it's actually very interesting. Look at Rashi, with Tzara Mirabanan, shetzarech liyasher dirachav u'lizkadesh af b'mutralo, pen yomadu mimenu l'zalzel b'yisrun afilu b'nechayis nami lo nechol. So Rebbe says this. So after Rebbe suggests this incredible idea, right, that if you live in a locale where you could prepay a debt, and you the lender have collateralized property, you have to create a fixed diminution amount for each year. That fixed amount becomes the sale price. Then you can consume the produce with absolutely no ribis issues. The Gemara says, but a Talmud Chacham shouldn't do this. Now I will say, why shouldn't a Talmud Chacham do this? Because I will say, remember again, the common man, when he sees this, is not going to necessarily understand all of the mechanisms involved. If anything a Talmud Chacham does, people assume if a Talmud Chacham does it, then what? Yeah. It must be 100% okay. And if a person is not versed in technicalities, they may come to really enter into a real ribis situation. So therefore, as much as this is mutter, a Talmud Chacham should not really involve himself in this, because the Talmud Chacham has to hold his behaviors to a higher level. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, Ela b'may nechol. Sheva says, okay, so how does a Talmud Chacham lend on collateral? Right, now I will say, now again, I want to point out, obviously, all of this only comes up if you're talking about the type of collateral that you need to use. In other words, the l'maisa, again, if I lend, if Reuven lends Shimon money and Shimon gives Reuven, a bar of gold, then this doesn't come up, right? This is coming up because the collateral itself has a usage. So I'll say, how should if a Talmud Chacham wants to lend money and receive a field, a payros producing field as collateral. How does he do it? To which the Gemara says, b'kitzusa. He should do it with kitzusa. Okay, so we'll say we don't know what kitzusa is yet. That's fine according to the opinion that says that kitzusa is mutar. According to the opinion that says kitzusa is aser, what is there to say de'itmak? Because we'll say this is machlokes. What's the machlokes? Here we go. Kitzusa. When it comes to kitzusa, pligi ba Rav Acha v'Ravina. Rav Acha and Ravina arguing about it. Chad amar kitzusa sharia. One says kitzutza is mutar. The Chad amar kitzutza asira. One says kitzutza is asar. Now I will say, by the way, you read a Gemara like this and you feel like a little bit foolish. Why do you feel foolish? Why? I don't know what you're talking about. What's a kitzutza? The Gemara says, hechi dami kitzutza. What's a kitzutza? So you ask yourself, wouldn't it make more sense to start with, right? The Gemara says kitzutza. Then the first thing should be, hechi dami kitzutza. What's a kitzutza? Then get into the machlokes. So Chazal are teaching us a very important yesod as well. That one of the most important aspects that a yid could possess is emunah pshuta. They will say sometimes you just have to believe. And sometimes you just have to accept, even if you don't understand. The essence of the Jew is the ability to believe in things we don't see, the ability to believe in things that we can't fully comprehend, but to accept it as no less as MS, even though I can't understand it. Our entire relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu was, you have all of these books. It's always interesting that, prove the existence of God and prove this and prove that. I'm just going to tell you, personally, I've never been a fan of literature. Besides that, I don't really find it so compelling, right? But Lamaisa, I've never been a big fan of it because I think it misses one of the most beautiful parts of Yiddishkeit. And one of the most beautiful parts of Yiddishkeit is the ability to believe without understanding. The ability to put your absolute and undying and unwavering commitment in something, even though you can't explain it. I can't explain how Hakadosh Baruch Hu went out and created the world. And the truth is, no amount of science could fully explain it as well. Because if science could fully explain it, then it wouldn't be belief. It wouldn't be belief. The beauty of our relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu, like we spoke about on Pesach, is that there's a certain element of bittul. There's a certain element of bittul hadas, of negation of the intellect, and just giving myself over totally to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what I will say. The beauty in Yiddishkeit is not found in the areas that you could understand or discover with your mind. That's not where the beauty is. The beauty in Yiddishkeit are in those moments that are intellectually indescribable and emotionally overwhelming. That's where the beauty in Yiddishkeit really comes. So I think Chazal are teaching us an incredible yesod that purposely, right, there's a whole discussion about kitzuz, right? Okay, good. There's a machlokes, right? Somebody asks you, tell me, what do you know about kitzusa? Oh, kitzusa, there's a machlokes. One opinion says it's mutar. One opinion says it's aser. Oh, by the way, what's kitzusa? I have no idea. But I can tell you, one opinion says mutar, one will say that's hashkafic conditioning for a yid. That's what it means to be a Jew. I don't understand, but I'm still fully vested. Incredible. So Gemara goes weiter. It's not the Gemara. So by the way, hechidami kitzutza. So by the way, what is kitzutza? So the Amarle ad chamish shinin achilna la belona chaysa. So also here's the arrangement. The arrangement is like this, right? So Reuven lends Shimon $10,000. Shimon gives Reuven a field, and he says like this: for the first 5 years, you could consume the produce of that field without any diminution of the debt. The chaysa means also taking off some amount of the debt. But from after 5 years, we're going to take a full accounting of all the produce that you consume. Okay, that's one version of it. Ikadamri, another version of it. Kol below nechaisa aser. We'll say what does it mean? It says so. Ikadamri, another version. Kol below nechaisa aser. Anytime you use collateral, the lender uses collateral without some type of corresponding diminution of the debt is going to be aser. So the Gemara says, so what's kitzusa? The Amarle ad chamish shinin achilna benechaisa. For the first 5 years, you could consume peiros benechaisa. You could consume peiros, and we will diminish the debt in some way. After that, we'll go ahead and assess the full amount of peiros that you have consumed. Okay, so let's say so two different versions. Man da asr bekamaisa, sharba basraisa. So the one who said ultimately again that it's asr in the first version would say that it's mutter in the second one. Uman da asr basraisa, heichi shar lemechal. But according to the one who says that it's asr in the second version, so how are you ever able to eat? How are you ever able to consume produce? of a collateralized field. To which the Gemara says, fascinating. Shari ki mashkanta desura. Okay, we'll say this is going to be a fascinating sugya as well. Mashkanta desura. So we'll say, what's the type of mashkon, the type of collateral that they used in surah? We'll say, what was the mashkanta desura? This is incredible. Dichsivi behachi b'shalim shanya ilaim tepok arodah below kasef. So we'll say, listen to this. Mashkanta desura operated in the following way. We'll say, essentially, what it was like this: Reuven lent Shimon $10,000. Shimon gave Reuven a field, and I will say, and again, they said at the end of 10 years, the debt will be fully paid off through your use of the field. I will say that's called mashkanta desura, where essentially the mashkon, the collateral, wasn't simply collateral. What was the collateral? What was it? The collateral itself was the vehicle of repayment. That's called mashkanta desura. And I will say, here's what's interesting. Everyone agrees that works. Right? Of course that works, because we must remember again, what are we doing? Essentially what we're saying is, every year you get to use the field is worth a certain amount of money. So let's say, for example, again, Reuven is lending Shimon $10,000. You have the field for 5 years. So what we're saying is, the value of the produce of the field is worth $2,000 a year. So after 5 years, your debt is paid. And everyone will agree that such a scenario like that will work. Incredible. All right, well, so you know what, we'll have to stop over here for today. All right, like hard Gemara. Not hard, but it just takes time. I would say, Shkoyach, I'm sorry we didn't get as far as I thought we would get, but hopefully I get good feast. So I'll say, looking forward to another incredible week. Shkoyach, everyone.